Hi, welcome to The Witch in the Woods, and today I would like to talk to you about the mysterious concept of Swan Maidens, Selkies, and spirit spouses. So, spirit spouses and spirit lovers have been part of mythology since ancient times. We can surmise this because they are so widespread across the planet that we can only really presume that they are as old as mankind themselves, and these stories actually spread with the earliest prehistoric peoples as they spread across the globe. What we often see is what is classified in the N. Thompson classification of fairy tales as animal brides, but this is a little misleading, and it's more encompassing than that. They're not only about animals and they're not only about females. They can also be male characters, and they can also be fairy beings or elven beings. But the myth and the basis of the story usually runs along similar kind of lines, in that an otherworldly being helps a human hero to do impossible tasks, or in some way to use magic to gain an advantage over competitors and over challenges. There is this concept in folklore and fable that there are two worlds. There is our mundane, ordinary, everyday world, and there is the other world, which is a mysterious and magical place we don't always have access to, but we have heard that it's there and that we have some understanding that it may exist. And the concept I was given, which I don't fully understand but I will relate to you, is that it's like looking in a mirror. You cannot reach into the mirror and touch the world you see there. If you try, you will only touch a flat plane. But when you look into a mirror, what you can see are things that you cannot see with your own eyes normally. So you get the vision of something that's normally beyond your perception, which is not only your own self and your own face, but things that are behind you. And so in this analogy, reaching into the other world is somehow having access to information that is not normally easily and readily available. The concept of fairy lovers is so vast that it's very hard to cover it all in one go. Every culture seems to have a story of spirit spouses, spirit lovers, spirit demons. In some stories, they are humans that have been turned and bewitched into other creatures. In some, they are magical beings that have somehow stepped into our world. In Christianity, they are incubus and succubus, and they are demons which are here to feed off our energy. So they can have beneficial aspects, or they can have much maligned aspects. It's not very easy to say they are either good or bad. They don't fall into those categories quite that easily. But their tales live far across the world and seem to become part of mythology in every culture. This concept of spirit spouses talks of a love between their world of the other world of magical beings and our human world. And as such, it is often very strained and tenuous. The idea of love can be a difficult concept for humans, And we may think that love is always flawed in the human world in some way. In fact, the concept of love unconditionally may be beyond humanity to understand. Do we perhaps assign that to another world? Do we perhaps say that only the divine can really understand love, and that when that love enters our world, it is by definition flawed, is by definition difficult and strained and tenuous? So this is one aspect of the spirit spouse, and perhaps we know this best in modern mythology, from the tales of Tolkien, which are quite fresh in our minds still, since the Lord of the Rings films. And Tolkien tried to address this concept in his love of Aragorn and Arwen. And it's quite a sad tale. Arwen, obviously, if not exactly immortal, lives a longer and different life to Aragorn. And the love can never be truly satisfying. In fact, at the end of the story, Aragorn dies and Arwen is left to mourn him forever. But it was a love that was deep, and it was a love that was very meaningful. And so this concept of love with an otherworldly being, it denotes difficulty and love winning through despite. But in these tales, Tolkien actually named his heroine Arwen after the bardic inspiration that a poet receives from the other world. So in many ways, Arwen was in fact the muse. She was the inspiration for beauty and creativity and great passion. And this concept of Arwen is quite old. We have reference to it in many early texts, so we know this is an actual legitimate part of bardism. And it's a Welsh word, and it comes from a root word which means air or to blow, almost a breath itself. And we have reference to a person who receives Arwen, who was called an Arweneth or an Arwenithion. And they were legitimate people who would fall into a trance and receive divine inspiration and prophetic vision. Now, we've actually got some writings passed down to us from the 12th century, so quite late on, by a man called Giraldus Cambrensis, or Giraldus Cambrensis, and he was writing in 1147. And he gave us a description of these Arwenithions. And he wrote down, "There are certain persons in Cambria," which is Wales, "whom you will find nowhere else, called Arwenithion, or people inspired. When consulted upon any doubtful event, they roar out violently, are rendered beside themselves, and become, as it were, possessed by a spirit. They do not deliver the answer to what is required in a connected manner, but the person who skillfully observes them will find, after many preambles and many nugatory and incoherent, though ornamented speeches, the desired explanation, conveyed in some turn of a word. They are then aroused from their ecstasy, as if from a deep sleep, and as it were by violence, compelled to return to their proper senses. After having answered the questions, they do not recover until they are shaken by other people, nor can they remember the replies they have given. If consulted a second or third time upon the same point, they will make use of expressions totally different. Perhaps they speak by some means of fanatic and ignorant spirits. These gifts are usually conferred upon them in dreams. Some seem to have sweet milk or honey poured on their lips. Others fancy a written schedule is applied to their mouths. And on awaking, they publicly declare that they have received this gift. Now, as I say that, you may have brought into mind what we have seen of shamans going into trance, who seem quite illegible, quite incomprehensible, and seem to have no real conscious knowledge of what's been happening to them, and a spirit has taken them over and possessed their body. So many shamans across the world and across all continents work with what is called a spirit spouse, or a spirit husband and wife. And these spirit spouses give the shaman access to otherworldly powers. In fact, they are the main spirit helper of a shaman, and a shaman is not initiated into shamanism until they have received a spirit spouse. They may meet these spirit spouses. I keep trying to say spices. Their spouses in dreams or in trance, or in some places like Africa. Everybody has a spirit husband, a spirit wife, and it is contacted to work, help, beneficial help in this world on behalf of a person in relation to, say, fertility or finding a marriage partner. And these were contacted through making a spirit doll of the spirit husband or the spirit wife, and then that doll was asked to help the person in this world. However, if that doll failed to help the person, they had no qualms at all in casting that doll away and either making another or consulting somebody else. So these were some ways of attracting the spirit lover into your life. And in Asia and many parts of the world, it was the spirit lover who granted a person luck and power. But more importantly, the spirit husband or the spirit wife was associated particularly with hunting, and to consort with this lover would grant somebody a good hunt, would provide them plenty and show them where the best catches are and give them luck in the hunt. And in Asia, in Siberia, the goddess of the hunt was considered a female spirit who a hunter would meet in dreams, and he had to seduce her, he had to charm her, he had to win her favour. And if he managed to seduce this beautiful woman, she would grant him luck in hunting. And similar tales are found all across the world, from Japan and the Philippines to Ireland and Great Britain. In stories that come down to us in Britain, we may see this spirit spouse in our tales of the Mabinogion, where, for example, Rhiannon rides out of a fairy mound on a horse and is pursued by Pwyll, Prince of Dyfed. And also there are tales of shape-shifting women such as Bloodlines, who turns into an owl and returns to her otherworldly fate, which is quite similar to the tales of Selkies. These animal bride stories are so widespread and are found on continents even such as the Americas that it could be argued that these tales are actually as old as mankind themselves and have spread across the world as mankind has moved, as Cro-Magnon has moved, and taken these tales with them. Now, these tales are not always of a bride. In fact, quite often they can be of an otherworldly male figure who quite often in tales is the father of an unborn child. So for example, in the Scottish tale of Tam Lin, Janet has to seek her lover out from the otherworld, who, although originally he was a man, has now been stolen into fairyland and become an elfin grey. And so Janet has to spirit him back from that otherworldly fate back into humanity to become the father of her child. In legends also, Merlin had no human father and was possessed of great powers of skill, bardicry, poetry, and magic. And even in Christianity, Mary, of course, gave birth to the child Jesus, who was said to have no earthly father. And in Greece, these tales abound of gods turning into animals and coming down to earth to consort with human women. And the offspring of these half-human and half-divine affairs have magical powers and great skills and notoriety. So many tales, a child who is conceived who is half human and half fairy. And even to the last century, there were people in old villages, I don't know about in Europe, but I presume in places like Wales and Ireland, who considered themselves to be of a family line that was of the fairy bloods. And they took this quite seriously. There are still people who consider themselves to be from families that had fairy bloods. And these people would be like seers or herbalists or the cunning people of the village. And they attributed their powers to this otherworldly ancestor. So in Scotland, these tales abound. And what we see in Scotland are the tales of Selkies, or spirit wives who were seals. Now the Selkie or the Silkie means a seal person, a seal folk. Strangely, a Silkie is also what is called a banshee in Ireland. And really the root of it means a grey woman, a grey spirit woman. And banshee, of course, is an otherworldly woman that is associated with a family line that will bring predictions of death and misfortune to that family. Now, in Scotland, the Selkie wife was the common tale. And here the tale is of seal women who were otherworldly beings who would take off their seal skins and had the ability to shapeshift into beautiful human women, and were often seen dancing naked on the sands under a full moon or on certain days. Avec skill a gadri loy nachin shuim haiba manda gab shitam soy haina gisna khoy ye about bit for Sagashin Slamnaku Shanadan to Howden Hita the Mabadahi feel Telegishin Habine try Scotishin Navigan Suk the Kraft the Koyimban Achenach Taminam Ehrlich Kashahon Shaman Bitashku Sedachlan Dun Hook Miloi. Now the story is that a fisherman comes along and sees the beautiful naked dancing Selkies and steals their Selkie skin. And as they have stolen their seal skin, they are now trapped in the mortal world and cannot return to the sea. So they are forced to become the husbands of these fishermen, and they live out their human days and they have children and become good wives. But always they mourn for the sea. They long to return to the sea and they long to return home. The end of these tales, very often the children return their seal skins to them, seeing that their mother is so sad, or in some other way they find their seal skin again, and immediately they put on their seal skins and return to the sea. They leave their human children behind and they're never seen again, but perhaps you may see a seal come close to the shore who may leave gifts of shells and beautiful pearls for their human children, or they may help the fishermen and their children and their family line in having good catches and avoiding storms. And there are many tales of this. And the tales differ. In some tales, the fisherman takes pity on the Selkie and does not take her little pups from her, and in which case the Selkie blesses the fisherman and gives him a favour in return. In some stories, the man who hurts a seal or hurts the Selkie is plagued with bad luck. And in Scotland it was considered unlucky to kill a seal. It wasn't very often that a seal would be killed for blubber or skin. The idea being that they were close to the human world, that they were close to otherworldly magical beings, then to harm one would be unforgivable. So a similar tale is told in the Americas by the Lakota about Buffalo Calf Woman. And here a beautiful woman is transformed before the very eyes of two hunters who spy her and see that she is a magical being. Now one hunter has bad intent towards her and approaches her with the idea of raping her. But Buffalo Calf Woman destroys him so that all that is left of him is a pile of bones. The second hunter, however, has spied her beauty and her power and respected this woman. And because of that, he is granted blessings. And so Buffalo Calf Woman comes to them at a time when the Lakota are starving. And she promises the Lakota that she will help them and return them to a great nation once again. And she passes on to them secret rituals and secret power and secret shamanic processes. And truly the Lakota did recover and become a powerful nation. So these follow the theme of animal brides and hunter spirits who bless a hunter, or otherworldly spirits who bless a hunter. And perhaps the most widespread and best known of these stories are the Swan Maiden tales. Now, the Swan Maiden tales are told all across the planet, from the Philippines to Ireland, and they follow very similar lines, very similar story plots. And the story is that the Swan Maidens can transform into human women by removing their swan feather cloaks. But one day they have been spied upon, and a hunter or a farmer or somebody steals their swan feather cloak and traps them in the human world, where they are forced to become the wife of this man, the husband. Now, swans are symbolic of many things. Their beauty and their grace signify beauty and poetry and art. They're white feathered birds, and if you see them, they almost glow on the water. They reflect that much light, and this makes them very ethereal. So, of course, for that reason, they've been associated with the soul and with the spirits. And swans mate for life. They stay together and raise their young together. And for this reason, a swan is also associated with everlasting love, loyalty, real deep emotional love.
Flowing through my being, deep within my heart, I am seeing eternal love, eternal love. There is the deep.
Now, when the Swan Maiden has her feather cloak stolen, she is trapped in a human relationship, a human contract. And like the Selkies, she forever longs to return to her home. She has, in fact, had her identity stolen from her and is trapped in a somewhat loveless marriage where she is forced to give children to a farmer, to a hunter. And it's perhaps not a very satisfying relationship for her. At the end of the story, she always retrieves her swan feather cloak, and she always returns home to where she came from, leaving behind her half fairy and half human children. So these stories speak to us of two levels of love. The swan symbolises loyalty, deep love, deep communion, and the stealing of her swan feather cloak symbolises these things being taken from her to live in a human relationship of a contractual and slightly dissatisfying kind. Perhaps real love is otherworldly, and to be human is to live in a world that is slightly devoid of real and genuine love quite a lot of the time. These ones appear in many stories. There's the story of Wayland the Smith, where he is married to a woman who is a half fairy blood, whose mother was divine and father was mortal. I'm not quite sure I've got that the right way round. And she has magical abilities. Wayland falls in love with her, and she is able to turn into a swan. But when she marries Wayland, she puts away her magical talents and becomes his loyal wife. Now, the twist in this story is at the end of this story, Wayland is actually trapped by enemies and cannot escape. But what he does is he dons a swan feather cloak, having made it, and escapes his enemy by flying away in the shape of a swan, which we presume is to go and join his wife in the other world.
They believed in me.
So in many ways, the spirit lover could be seen as part of the soul that we have left behind in the other world, part of a relationship that we have left behind in the other world. The idea is slightly akin to the anima and the animus, in that we have an opposite part of us somewhere, and that we are not complete until we have two sides of that whole being. And swans are often portrayed as this part of soul. The idea being that the swan signifies some ethereal and beautiful bird capable of flight. And to win back this love, we cannot coerce it, we cannot steal its skin. We can only seduce it. Now, Andrew Collins has an interesting theory concerning these Swan Maidens. And the myths and legends that relate to Swan Maidens that are actually related to ancient star knowledge. And he says that the Swan Maiden stories may actually relate to the constellation of Cygnus in the sky. Now, he relates this back to a very early shamanic myth and mystery of a swan cult. And he says that the area of Cygnus was seen in the night sky as a portal into the sky world, through which I presume souls were born and souls were incarnated. Now, I've got to say, this is the book, The Cygnus Key, Andrew Collins. The Denisovan Legacy. I'll say that again. The Denisovan Legacy. I can't say that. The Denisovan Legacy. That's very hard. Göbekli Tepe and the Birth of Egypt. And this arrived on my doorstep a day or two ago. So I haven't read it yet. So I'm not going to say very much about it, other than it's probably worth a read. So what he relates is that he believes the early shamans of Siberia, and particularly the Altai region of Siberia around Lake Baikal, had a swan cult, and Cygnus was seen as the portal into the other worlds through which the heavens revolved. Now, many people in the area still relate to this day that they have a swan as an ancestor in that region of Lake Baikal. And curiously, some of the earliest instruments to be found have been swan bone flutes. And one of these was found in Germany, I think it is, and it was not made by human hands, it was made by Neanderthals. I'm not quite sure, but I think they've also found similar bones in the Denisovan caves around that time as well. And these swan bones, these swan flutes, relate to magical musical initiations that perhaps took part in caves from the very earliest times by the very earliest peoples. And he suggests that the Swan Maiden tale is actually very, very ancient indeed. It may actually go back to 45,000 years ago, when Cygnus was in fact the stars around which the whole heavens revolved. Now, this is conjecture, and as I say, I haven't read the whole book. But the idea of myths and mythology being related to star lore is completely credible in my eyes. So I won't go further into that. I recommend reading the books if you're interested in that. Or you can find the Cygnus Key on YouTube. Have a look for Andrew Collins. And I think perhaps the figure of the Swan Maidens is very, very ancient indeed. In fact, even in India, the goddess associated with love and beauty, who is portrayed next to a swan holding a lute, and of course Cygnus is next to the constellation of Lyra in the skies, may actually relate to this ancient star lore that's been passed down to us. Now, there are many tales of swans. They appear in the stories of the children of Lear, where the children are transformed into swans for 100 years, and as soon as their foot steps back onto mortal soil, they become as dust. Another story tells how the swan is mute all his life, but at the moment of his death, he will sing the swan song, which is the most beautiful, ethereal song you ever heard that would bring tears to your eyes. And the idea being that his whole life has led up to this final act of beauty just before he passes and returns to the other world. And so in many stories and many figures, the swan represents soul. It represents the incarnation of soul into the human and returning back to the other worlds. So the swan then is symbolic of immortal love, of beauty and the grace of the soul. It cannot be trapped indefinitely in this world, and the swan is the being who remembers the other world, remembers its true origins, and always seeks to return home to that place of joy and love. And meeting with this soul partner, with this spirit lover, as I say, is the initiation into shamanism that a Siberian shaman must go through to receive power, wisdom and understanding. And as I said before, these spirit lovers, soul partners, were contacted in dreams or in trance. Sometimes they could be contacted through the underworld journey, going to meet the spirit lover in a shamanic journey. Also, as I say, in Africa, people would build a doll of their spirit lover with which to commune and with which to ask for blessings and help to give them aid in this world. So these stories are very old and have always been epitomised by the perhaps ancient story of the Swan Maiden. So I hope you found that of some interest, and thank you for listening. If If you have any comments, then please let us know in the comments below. And if you liked what you heard, then please like and share and subscribe. And I hope to speak to you all again soon. Thank you. Bye.